Have it out there, Dan here, aka the Comic Concierge, and this is one of my comic book countdown videos where I'm going to count down my top 10 comics that came out last week. And if you've watched these videos in the past, I tend to count down every book that I've read. I'm going to try to focus these a little bit more, just because I'm trying to look at the books I have the most to say about, and just so maybe I don't spend, an hour and a half just talking about comics. We'll see how it goes. If you prefer the other format, maybe we'll go back to it. But also, I'm finding it a little bit difficult to get to the comic book store on comic book day. So instead, as I'm reading a lot of these books digitally, it's a little easier to do it this way. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how things change. But it's all about variety and spice of life. But let's start the countdown by looking at my number 10. My number 10 is Eve number 1. And I'm also hesitant to when I do countdowns like this, where I try not to overrate or overpraise new number ones, because I feel like when you get a shiny new toy, it's easy to kind of look at what works and overlook what doesn't, or just like, oh, here's a new story, and then we kind of forget about books that have been around for some time. And I'll say there are other number ones that hit this, so maybe I'm not successful, but at the end of the day, I gotta get with the books that came out and what ones I ended up liking the most. And I did really like Eve number 1. I wasn't sure what I was going to enjoy about it, but I liked Victor LaSalle's last book, the different take he had on Frankenstein. And this, again, it's a dystopian future book, and I tend to harken on how we get way too many of those. But if you can do it right, and I think this is doing it right because it's giving you opportunity to really care about this kid, Eve. And yes, maybe the name of Eve is overused a little bit, but of course, the biblical reference. But what are you gonna do? That heavy-handed messages was overlooked with just seeing the dynamic that she has with her father at the beginning. I think you get a nice little scene with her and her father just enjoying dinner, and then you get kind of brought into the actual reality to see the world is much different and much darker. And this is very much your setting of the stage issue. Like, I guess you could say not a lot happens in this issue where you're just learning about this world, but I just thought getting the opportunity to see these characters and getting an opportunity to care about the characters is, to me, one of the most important pieces. I do like the fact that you have this like teddy bear android like character, and the dynamic between that character and Eve was a lot of fun, and the fact that he actually is kind of a badass, or like this hidden really wrecking machine inside the shell of a teddy bear, which was a nice little touch. It does a little bit of that, just I think, go a long way. And then the message itself, like, we know exactly where this is going, as they're trying to save this world. So everything's there. It doesn't necessarily give you much more than just if you read the description of the book, which is usually something that kind of irks me a little bit when you get a number 1 that all it really does is put in on the page of what you were expected for the first issue. But I thought what was there and the smaller moments is what worked for me, so that's why it landed on my number 10 spot. Number 9 for me is Strange Academy, which is written by Scotty Young with art by Roberto Ramos. And man, I love seeing Roberto Ramos draw this world, draw Marvel characters. In this issue, it's all about a field trip, and then we also get him to see the way he draws Asgard. It's a very different style. What he's doing is very different than what Nick Klein's doing for the Thor book, but it very much fits the tone of this story. And I could not imagine these characters not with his hand behind them. It just would not look quite as well, because they just have that nice tinge, that nice cartoony look to them, to make it feel like appropriate for the story it's telling. And there's also some fantastic pages in this. Like, there's a great spread of just all these different characters, and as they're going through Asgard, which was phenomenal to look at. And I love how, again, this is such an effective book, because again, we're seeing it through the perspective of these kids, and it just makes you realize how strange and magical a place of Asgard is, and just a crazy dynamic of all these kids in this world. Some nice, cool revelations in this issue, some characters that we've not seen in the Marvel Universe from some time, kind of showing up again, which was really cool to see, getting into the deep mythos of the Marvel U. The fact that they're doing in a book like this was quite good. And 10 issues in, it just has some of the, I think, really strong established characters, new characters that were never seen before, and now we're seeing all the different dynamics play out. It has, of course, being kids, you have those different pieces, but I thought one of the cool beats is just like this, the awkwardness of having your friends meet your parents and what if your parents are, gods, or things like that, just to make it even more complicated. I did like the idea of that story told through the lens of Marvel superheroes, or Marvel characters. That was a lot of fun, and I do think this is an issue. If you picked it up and you have not read the past books, it may not work as well, because there's a lot of dynamics here that have been built, and it touches upon them a lot. So if you don't understand those or don't know those, a lot of those ones are probably not going to hit you as hard. But I would highly recommend this book. Since it's come out, I think it's been one of Marvel's best books, because Scotty Young and Jorge Ramos, they just tend to, they just work really well together. Their styles, both in storytelling and art perspective, just are really clicking. I'm glad this book exists if you just missed it, because it's going to be like a Harry Potter ripoff, and maybe it is, but at the end of the day, it's a ripoff that works. Number 8 for me is Fear Case number 4, and I really struggled where to place this book. I was a huge fan of Matt Kent and Tyler Jenkins' past books, like The Black Badge and Grass Kings. I really loved those. I do think if I was going to rank those, that Fear Case was probably on the bottom of all three, but I still ended up liking it. I did think they kind of put themselves in a corner a little bit with this issue, with this idea, because you have a case that is supposed to be kind of designed to be all destruction, basically. What if all evil existed in one object? And in this issue, we actually did see them attempt to answer that question, and I give them credit for even approaching that and not just trying to leave it up to interpretation. Although it kind of did, but I think in one gigantic page spread, it kind of just tried to think, like, what can we make? How can we put all evil on one page? And I think it's going to ruffle some feathers, because you certainly have links to some more historical figures that are, renownedly looked at as being evil, with some more current political figures. So I'm sure some people are going to take some issue with that. But I did like the bold strokes there a little bit. And the fact that you did get this kind of crime genre with this little fantasy element, very much akin to something like X-Files. So I did think they hit the landing pretty well. It didn't completely fit for me. I did feel like within this issue and last issue, like I felt like there was a bit that was a little bit missing. Almost felt like we need to go back and reread it, because it felt like I was missing a bit, as it does kind of jump back and forth a little in the storytelling. But ultimately, I thought it was a successful idea, successful series, and one I would recommend checking out. Number 7 for me is Firepower number 11. And if you're going to look at a book based upon the amount of story, and there's a lot of books on this list this week that have a lot of story, this is not necessarily one of them. There is story here. I'm not going to say this is all action, but it is 90% of action, because you see these roaring tribes within the Firepower universe are finally going at it in this epic battle. And to me, it's like Robert Kirkman, when he wrote the script, told Chris Samney, all right, go. And that's what he did. This is what Chris Samney does pretty much better than anyone. Crisp action, the fluidity of motion throughout his book it's amazing. I think I'm glad that he is partnered with someone like Kirkman, because I think, it's probably going to put him on another level, a level that he really deserves to be at. I mean, he's of course done things with Mark Waid, like the Daredevil run, in his run on Captain America, but having a book that is his own, a book that is going to be, going to name, because Robert Kirkman might be one of the most popular writers right now within comics, with Invincible and Walking Dead. And if they were ever to kind of put this into any type of format, like a show or something like that, I don't know if it'll be as good, because I think what's great about this is seeing Chris Samney do it. If you just, made this a live action, I feel like it would be a much like a lot of other things, like an Iron Fist story or anything like that. But I love seeing Chris Samney draw, and putting him in a martial arts book makes a lot of sense. And there were, a big revelation in this story-wise. There was a lot of action, but there is a bit in this that's going to, that is not just about people punching people in the face. That's going to, play out. And then the way it ends was a little bit abrupt, but I think it's certainly leading to something that's going to majorly shake things up as it should go on. I do wonder how many issues this will maintain. Like, is this nearing the end? I could easily see 12 issues being the end of this book. I could also see it going on for another 50. We'll see with the next issue. When I talked about comics having a lot of story, it was looking at a comic like Eden number 1, which is written by Cullen Bunn with art by Della Telegeek, and I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly. This is a one-shot book, which is very much a one and done. And if you look at a lot of the like horror anthologies, I don't know if I would classify this as horror, but this would feel like, almost like a Twilight Zone episode or something like that, where you have this strange ongoings. And what I thought ended up working with this is the idea of a tattoo artist, and he has this kind of mundane lifestyle where he's kind of dealing with the same thing each and every day, and he seems like he's stuck in a rut, and you get a lot of hints to why that is. There's basically some tragedy in his life, and he's still kind of dealing with the ramifications of that. He's never been able to let go. But then this strange woman walks into the store and changes that, and kind of challenges him in a weird way and has him draw different tattoos. But every time she comes back, the tattoo that she says she loves is gone, and she wants a new tattoo. So it's kind of weird exactly what's happening, what's going on. And I thought it was going to be a book about obsession, and it kind of is, but not in the sense that I thought it was. I thought, you would see him falling in love with this woman, and what would that lead to? Like, a direction that I wasn't expecting. Like, when I looked at the description of this book, it's like, okay, I know how this ends, and as the story progressed, it maybe became a little obvious of where it was going, but I thought how it did execute the ending, like what it was saying, I thought was well executed. It was done well, and again, it did look quite good, because you can have a book that's all about tattoos and what they look like, and I liked how the art and the use of tattoo design really incorporated itself within the page layouts and things like that. There was a lot of unique and different takes about designing pages, and how it took like these animal designs, and the designs themselves were different and had a quality about them that was consistent but creative, and I liked seeing that. So it was a good looking book, on top of the fact that this is a well executed story, something where it's like it had an idea, it had a premise, it didn't overstay its welcome, and by the end of it, I thought where it did end was kind of an emotional gut punch in a way. Number 5 for me is The Swamp Thing, number 3, and this is really rising in the ranks of the best books DC is putting out, which is no surprise, honestly, with art by Mike Perkins, written by Ryan V, and completely rewriting the mythos of Swamp Thing. And the first 2 issues kind of gave us a nice little taste of what the Swamp Thing is going to be. I feel like this is giving us the clearest picture yet about what exactly is happening. Does it answer all the questions? Not necessarily, but this issue all takes place in the green, and Mike Perkins just went to town on this book. I mean, it opens up on an incredible spread of basically like scans of brain scan. The way it metamorphosizes into the green by the end, I thought that's just immaculate storytelling right there. And throughout, Mike Perkins is just doing some fantastic work. Ram V is obviously a well-accomplished writer throughout. DC has been doing a lot of great work, and this continues it. But if I'm being honest, I think Mike Perkins is a big reason why I love this book as much. I mean, there's an incredible looking creature in this. I don't want to give it away, because if the design of it, I thought this is not something I would expect from a DC book. It's much more almost like Lord of the Rings-esque fantasy-wise. And, I've read some Swamp Thing. I've read not everything. There's a lot of Swamp Thing I haven't, but I find this approach very welcoming to a new reader. Like, if you've not read anything, there is a big tie to the past Swamp Thing, and I don't want to give it away, but if you just have a general sense of what Swamp Thing was in the past, and unlike, some of the other Swamp Thing books where I feel like they're just trying to rekindle what like Alan Moore did and tell that story, but in a different way, this seems to be like not even approaching that idea, and really in a way almost rewriting some other characters, because there's other DC characters that pop up in this, and the take on those is quite different as well. So, but if you're a person that's like a stickler for continuity, maybe some things like this would bother you. But I think it's what we're seeing here is just that things are changing, things are becoming something anew, and I think too by the end of this, we also have a problem to solve, like where the story is going, ultimately where the crux of this narrative is going to be. I think we get that answer by the end of this issue. So if you're like wondering ultimately like where the story is going, I think this issue, beyond all the other issues, answered that question the best thus far. I talk about how when I do these, I try not to overrate number ones and get all excited about the shiny new toy, but a book like The Good Asian number 1 makes it difficult not to do that. As a person whose my favorite genre is crime noir, and this again, I love with the way it's approaching that and taking like a Sam Spade-esque Maltese Falcon story, Chinatown story, and saying, okay, let's take that and let's repurpose it for a different type of story, but a different story that needs to be told. This focuses on the first Asian cop, and he's from Hawaii, but now he's coming back to the mainland and kind of dealing with some of the ramifications of that. Like even when he arrives being put into basically confinement, like similar confinement to other Asian immigrants, and seeing like the mistreatment there, and how he doesn't necessarily want to get different treatment just because he's a police officer, but also realizing he has another job to do. So this is very much a pointed critique over United States treatment of Asian Americans, especially during this time. And again, it's a piece that we don't necessarily talk about a great amount, but I will say it still within that, it's just a great crime story. Beyond that, it's a great balance of being able to be a point of criticism, an element of social commentary, and a good story all in one. Again, very much within that vein. If there's anything like with those types of stories, like with the noir stories, they can get a bit convoluted, and I would say that does run that same risk, because there's a lot of different moving pieces here, a lot of character names that get thrown out. But to me, it's ultimately about atmosphere. It really nails that too, that design, that feeling. So if you're a big fan of that type of storytelling, like myself, I think you'll really enjoy this book. Also coming at a very important time too, as we are seeing, a rise in hate crimes to Asian Americans because of COVID, and just reminding us that underbelly has been there for some time. It's just been a piece that has not really been talked about nearly enough, and a book like this can tell a great story while having a great message behind it as well. Number 3 this week is Youth Season 2, number 2, and maybe I should have made it number 2 just to make all the 2s together, but alas, I decided not to go that route. And I've been really liking this book. I really love the last volume, and this new volume is focused on different characters. And this issue, I actually thought like, oh, we're getting another new set of different characters. What exactly is going on here? But eventually we do get back to the main characters of issue number 1. And I actually thought that the format piece was one of the strongest parts of this, because it took an ending that could have been almost feeling like a cheat, and making it make sense, because we had like a storyline that went out and then came back in, and when we had a better understanding of the universe of Youth at a larger scale. The general premise of the story, again, of Youth, is looking at the idea of what if you took Youth-like issues, classic Youth stories you would expect, and added superpowers into the mix. And this being called Badlands, it's very much taking the Badlands movie plot and adding superpowers to it, and it's actually working quite well. And I was actually surprised by some of the choices they made in this, in the sense of you get this moment between a father and son, and you think like, okay, well, we're getting a nice reprieve here a little bit, but then abruptly that ends, and violence ensues. And I like the way it's approaching these characters, and these are characters that are certainly very flawed. And I think what you're seeing too is if like you're dealing with a lot of past demons, and you're just trying to discover who you are, and you add superpowers into the mix, especially if you don't have like a Charles Xavier behind you, bad things are going to happen, and we're seeing those bad things play out. And I'm excited to see what happens next issue. It does seem like that now that season 1 and season 2 might be coming together a little bit. So the other thing with this, it is a Comixology Unlimited original. So if you want to read it, you do have to read it digitally as of right now. But you can also pick it up if you don't have Unlimited. I think it's like $3 an issue, although it would make sense just to get Unlimited, because I think Unlimited is like $5 a month. So why not get both? Yeah, I don't know. But of all the Comixology Unlimited originals, like this to me is up there as one of my favorites that has come out thus far. Number 2 for me this week, and it was really hard for me with my placement of number 2 and number 1, but I ended up going with Red Room on number 1 from Fantagraphics, written and drawn by Ed Piskor. And I didn't realize it was actually coming out this week. It was on Comixology, and saw, oh wow, it's available digitally already, and I'm getting my physical copy directly from Fantagraphics in the mail shortly. So it may not be available physically yet, but it's available digitally. Since I was able to read it, I'm including it in this week's countdown. So if you're wondering that, hey, my shop didn't have it, maybe check next week. Or I said you can get it directly from Fantagraphics themselves. So I will say Red Room is a book. It talking about like how Eden is an extended issue. So is Red Room. Like Red Room is about 68 pages. This is basically a graphic novel. Like there is that much story. There's going to be other issues of this, but this could really be its own graphic novel by itself, and you would have, you'd be fine. And but to be warned, this is a book that probably is not going to work for everyone, and purposely so. This is about murder on the dark web, for fun and profit is the tagline of this. And when they say murder, they mean murder, hardcore murder. They're the art. I mean, Ed Piskor goes to town with this book, and I mean, I love his art. Like, he makes the most brutal and disgusting things look amazing on the page. Clearly, he wanted to make a book that was, within the underground type of format, where you would pick it up and it's a book that, a lot of people would burn because it's evil. It's doing things that you shouldn't see in the comic, and almost torture porn-esque in a way. But I feel like maybe because it's in black and white, or a comic, it doesn't necessarily hit me the same way as seeing something like Saw or something like that. And I think there's a little bit more craftsmanship to it as well. I love Ed Piskor's art. If you read his past comics like Hip Hop Family Tree, you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of influences there, but I feel like makes him most akin to something like Harvey Pekar, which is the person he has worked for in the past. And if you watched his YouTube channel, Cartoonist Kayfabe, you kind of know where his different styles and influences come from. And he's a person that is certainly a student of the game in a lot of different ways. The knowledge that he has as a comic book creator is kind of second to none, and I think you see that within this. And there's that old adage of making something excited on every page, and I think that's clearly here. Like I said, it's a book that may not work for everyone because it's going to turn a lot of stomachs. It's going to be hard to read at times. It's grotesque. It's brash purposely. But if you can, it's something that you can, stomach, if you like those like old trauma films. But imagine there was that old trauma film that you would see, like The Toxic Avenger, but done with a much more talented creative team behind it. You'd get something like Red Room #1, and each issue is going to be, a self-contained story that you don't necessarily need to read the past ones. But I think maybe give number one a shot. If you ended up liking it, check out some of his past work as well. I don't necessarily think if you love Hip Hop Family Tree, are you going to like this book? It's very different. Maybe look at the preview pages. If those, strike your fancy. You can also check it out on his Patreon. He puts it up on there as well. So if you want to read it digitally, you can do it either way. But if you want to support, any creator that's doing something for comics, I think that comics desperately needs right now an exciting book like this that is unlike anything else that anyone's willing to put out in any shape or form. Definitely check it out on Comixology, Fantagraphics, or get it at your local comic book store. My number one this week, and as often is the case, picking my number one was quite hard. Although I say my number one and my number two were the hardest decisions. I knew they would both be up there, but I ended up going with Dead Dog's Bite #3 as my number one. And each issue that's come out has been my favorite comic of the week, and it's just a book that's really hitting with me. Tyler Boss's art and sense of humor, I love so much about this book. It's different, it's unique. I think I saw someone compare it to taking like Juno and Twin Peaks and putting it into one thing, and I could definitely see that. It doesn't necessarily have the same level of surrealness as something like a David Lynch movie, but at times it does, especially with this like weird narrator that you see at the beginning and the end that kind of comes out of nowhere. And I don't know, it's very weird and different, and which is why I really like it. But I just love Tyler Boss's storytelling in this art. It's just phenomenal. The page that really stands out to me is that you see the main character looking through these archives at the library, and the way he rendered that on the page I thought was great. Like a scene that could be dull, a scene that we've seen so many times before of someone going to the library, looking at past newspapers. You see that so many, although we don't see it much anymore. Usually they're just Googling things. But anyways, but looking at it through this lens, looking at it through his style, it was the page design was so fantastic. There's just so much there. I think someone like David Aja, I feel like, has heavily influenced a book like this, especially in the lettering design, especially in like the use of a lot of quick panels. It seems to be something I would make it more akin to. So if you love his work, I think you'd probably really like this book. And it's just centered on this mystery of this girl trying to find out what happened to her friend who's gone, and no one can find her. She's missing, and she's taking all these different chances. And there's just great dynamic between her and the police officer there, and they keep having these different run-ins. Last time it was having dinner. This time it was her driving with her in a snowstorm, the ever-changing world too, like how you get this knowing background and how that ties into the story. There's just so much here to love and appreciate, and I just find myself like giddy every time I'm reading this book, even though it's kind of dealing with something that's maybe a little serious, like a person that's missing. But I think that sense of humor that's always there, yet it never diminishes or minimizes the stakes in any way. You do feel like there's always that element of danger that's in the background, especially with the way this issue ends. So I just love this book so much. I cannot sing its praises anymore. I do hope I'm not like over hyping it a little bit so people end up being disappointed about it. I try to avoid hyperbole when I'm reviewing something because I feel like it's easy to do that. It's easy to like heap praise on things, and there's probably issues with this book that maybe I'm overlooking and people may not enjoy as much as I do. But I don't know, like I look forward to every issue, and each time I end up putting more and more expectations upon it, and by the end of each issue I still end up loving it. So, and again, like going up against a book like Red Room, which I was equally anticipating and feel like I still ended up enjoying this, although it doesn't necessarily mess with my mind nearly as much. So maybe that's why I enjoyed it. It was a little bit more leaner on that side, and a little bit more had a little bit more levity than something like Red Room. Although Red Room did have some humor, dark humor, twisted humor, but humor nonetheless. So anyways, I know with this format, I'm not talking about the books I disliked. I am debating about including up front like my biggest disappointments before I get in my top 10. I didn't necessarily have any major disappointments this week. I don't know, outside of maybe Batman continually not working for me. I think I'm going to definitely drop that. And then also the new Green Lantern, it just isn't clicking either. But outside of that, I had a pretty successful week reading comics. So what did you really enjoy this week? What were some of your favorite books? Let me know in the comment section below. What do you think about this format? Do you prefer doing it this way? Do you like it the old way, where I have an hour-long diatribe about all the books I read? I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll go back to that format. I don't know. It's all about keeping it spicy, I guess. We'll see. Anyways, thanks for taking the time to check out my video. I do appreciate that. Just remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, keep reading.